Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to talk about Stranger Things, and we're going to talk about relationship parsing. We're going to talk about Stranger Things season 4, and actually, spoilers for all of Stranger Things, but I am going to be discussing season 4 specifically. And today we're going to talk about relationship parsing. All right, so let's jump right into this. So, Stranger Things, it just dropped. It was a huge streaming release. And it talked about, and it really, when you look at Stranger Things, its skeleton is Dungeons and Dragons. Literally, the show is the meat of Stranger Things is put on the skeleton of Dungeons and Dragons. It's pretty wild. I think it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating just what is happening with with Stranger Things. And I think this is going to continue going forward. Like, I really think Dungeons & Dragons is going to... Stranger Things is the movie the D&D community was really waiting for. It was the media success we were waiting for. And I honestly think it's going to end up being a much bigger impact. I think it may have already been a bigger impact than we would have ever gotten from Hollywood, which, frankly, the only thing that's going on with Hollywood is literally the discussion of whether it's dead or not. So, it's quite fascinating. Yeah, so basically there is this question of, basically of where do we land with, and what I want to talk about today is relationship parsing. Where does everything, land with relationships and parsing out what happens, right? Really, with D&D players, how is their life split, okay? Now, I've already talked about the 4 attributes of friendship that were displayed within Stranger Things 4 for Dungeons & Dragons. Let's talk about, okay, so if you're a Dungeons & Dragons player or a Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master, Stranger Things 4 introduces 4 additional categories. So we already talked about friends and 4 different types of Dungeons & Dragons friends. Today, let's talk specifically about Dungeons & Dragons non-friend relationships for Dungeons & Dragons players and for Dungeon Masters IRL that Stranger Things 4 highlights, right? And by the way, like, I love, there are D&D commentators who just have such an incredibly shallow view of the world. And people will tell you, hey, Scott, this is a fictional story. It hasn't anything to do with anything with real life. I just want you guys to understand, fictional stories are massively connected to IRL, like, hugely, right? In 100 different directions. Like, fictional stories have real IRL impact. And, like, one of them, I don't know if you guys caught this, but one of the things that's happening right now with the story you just watched for Stranger Things, right? There's the story of Hawkins and Lenora, but there's also the story of Millie Bobby Brown and Finn Wolfhard, right? And their relationship with Netflix, and whether they're going to go off and be movie stars or whether they're going to hold Netflix over the barrel and get $10 million an episode each, right? Like, they're already paying $30 million an episode. That's real IRL impacts from a fictional story, right? So if you're out there and you hear these cute D&D commentators are like, oh, fictional things don't impact the IRL real world, just, it's cute. Like, don't be too hard on them. They're just thinking in the shallow end of the pool. Don't think too ill of them, right? Or too little of them. They're trying. They'll catch up. It's okay. All right. So let's talk about Dungeons & Dragons relationship parsing for IRL DMs and IRL Dungeon and Dragons players, IRL Dungeon Masters and IRL Dungeons and Dragons players, that is highlighted when you watch Stranger Things 4. Because when you watch Stranger Things 4, you're looking at D&D, serious Dungeon Masters, serious Dungeons and Dragons players, right? And it shows the shape of their lives and how Dungeons & Dragons parses it, right? So we've already examined friends. Let's look at non-friends, okay? People who are not their friends, right? Like, and so let's think about the party, right? So Whale DM, it's my mnemonic. Will, Lucas, Dustin, and Mike, okay? All right, so Dustin and Mike are both serious Dungeons and Dragons. They're all in, right? Like, there's no two ways about it, right? Lucas is a Dungeons and Dragons forsaker. He forsook the game, right? And Will Byers he just can't play because he's separated by proximity. Okay, but let's look at the party, and then let's look at how the rest of their relationships actually are parsed by Dungeons and Dragons, right? And how it is. So I'm going to use the word Fae here, F-A-A-E, which is my mnemonic, and let's get into the first one. Facilitators. Who are facilitators for Dungeons? So for Mike, so let's just talk about Mike and Dustin. Who are their facilitators, right? Let's talk about Mike specifically. He is a dedicated, skilled dungeon master, okay, of D&D 1E, okay, first edition. This is 1986. 1E is still in place, right? And, a bunch of, like, D&D people would squawk at you about whether it's ODD or ADD or, it's D&D 1E. Let's keep it simple and moving. All right, so basically, and by the way, D&D 2E arrives in 1989. All right, just to keep the versions clear here. All right, now there of course are gradations of editions within D&D 1E, but 1E is a real thing, and in 1986 D&D is 1E. Okay, all right. So Mike is there. Who's his facilitator? His biggest facilitator, right? I don't want to take his mother off the board, but his mother is actually a real character. Mike's father is in the show, but he is a I'm an American father. Right? I have 4 children. I've raised with my beautiful wife, and I take my fatherhood. It's the third most important thing in my life. Christian first, husband second, father third, right? And but like the depiction of Mike's father is just horrific. He's completely off the board. He's completely disengaged with his wife and with his children. He does provide for them, and he does play a provider role, so he makes sure there's a roof over their head. He makes sure they're fed. He actually feeds all their friends when they come over, right? He pays for all that. And Mike's father, so he's almost never talked about, right, when people talk about Stranger Things, which is a little annoying to me because I'm an American father. I'm exactly what he is, right? Like, he has 3 kids. He has a wife and 3 kids. I have a wife and 4 kids. So of course I kind of relate to him in the show, and he's just treated terribly. Like, he's kind of just there, right? It's just really kind of sad. I feel like they could have done more with him, or just given, like, everybody else gets a backdrop or some redemption except the American father. Like, they're always like, oh, fathers are completely unneeded now, and even Stranger Things carries this, which makes me a little sad. And anyway, I'm sorry for that tangent. All right, here we go. He is a facilitator, okay? He is a D&D facilitator, right? In a lot of ways. First of all, he gives Mike the money to buy whatever books he needs. And Mike's got a lot of books, right? He gives him the money to buy whatever dice he needs, the money to buy, grid paper, the money to buy miniatures. And you could see Mike actually has a pretty good setup. He has everything he needs, right? And it's clear that he's not wanting whatever he needs, to play D&D, he gets, right? Let's go a little further. Also, Mike hosts. He has a nice big house where they can go downstairs and yell all they want and nobody really hears them, right? Whereas if they went over to the buyer's house to play, right, which they generally don't do, right, they'd be right up in everybody's business because the buyers are poor and they have a small house, right? It's not their fault. It's just the reality of life, right? So, well, it is kind of the buyer's fault because the buyer's dad sucks too, right? Like, he literally left the kids, and and Joyce is doing the best she can to raise Jonathan and Will, but she really can't provide a great D&D space for them because Will and Jonathan's father has abandoned them, right? Like, so the view of fathers in Stranger Things is pretty bad, right? Like, but it's pretty standard for American media. Like, Disney doesn't even let them live, so, like, I guess it's not that bad. But anyway, that's a great question. Would it be better off if? Oh my gosh, I think Jonathan and Will might be better off if their father was dead. Yeah, I'm pretty sure of that, actually. That's kind of sad. I hope there aren't a lot of other people in America that are like that, but I suspect that might be the case. Yeah, that's really, really sad. Sorry. Okay. All right. Let's keep it moving here. All right. So, so he is a facilitator, right? And here's the other one. they've said this in the show. Like, I think Jonathan said to Nancy, like my parents don't make 100. My dad doesn't make $100,000 a year, right? He makes six figures. He is holding it down when it comes to provision, right? And so that the other thing is, and one of the reasons why is he's well educated. That's pretty clear, right? This guy ain't doing any laboring. He's a knowledge worker. That's very clear as well, right? They never say it, but there's 100 clues, right? Like, he comes home in a shirt and tie, right? This ain't blue collar land, right? And so he's a knowledge worker, which means he's also filled his home with books and literacy and reading, right? And made a space of knowledge, right? And all of that facilitates Mike's dungeon mastering. It makes him possible to dungeon master. This is a broader discussion. I'm convinced you have to be well educated to really get Dungeons and Dragons. It really demands high literacy and high math. There's no two. I don't even think that's debatable. I think some people would debate it, but we live in a difficult world where there are very few shared facts left, right? All right, so you have all this going on, right? Let's talk this through here, right? So you have your facilitator. Who's next? The adversary. In Stranger Things Season 4, the captain of the basketball team is an adversary, right? He's an adversary to Mike. He literally is looking for Eddie Munson, and if he comes across any members of the Hellfire team, the Hellfire Club, they are going to be in danger. And that is clear from the gate, right? He is an adversary. Let's talk about Dungeons and Dragons adversaries today, right? They're very interesting people. In 1986, there were a lot of them. They were all over. Okay, MAD. I'm pretty sure MAD still existed in 1986. Mothers Against Dungeons and Dragons. It was definite things, right? To my knowledge, there never was a dad. There never was dads against Dungeons and Dragons. Just mothers, which is interesting because we live in a world where we know that the genders are equal and there's no discernible difference, but there's all these weird demonstrations that that's not the case. It's kind of, the data doesn't match what we know. It's really odd. I think we're still waiting for that to shake out. I don't know. All right, so he's an adversary, and the basketball captain is I am against anybody in the Hellfire Club. I'm against anybody who plays Dungeons and Dragons. He calls them a cult. He says flat out. He says they're a cult, right? Fascinating, really, really fascinating, right? So you have all this going on, and so that's an adversary. Who is an ally? I don't think there's a clear picture of an ally in Season 4, but there is a clear picture of an ally in Season 5, right? I'm sorry, in Season 3. And that is the science teacher. Dustin and Mike's science teacher is a Dungeons & Dragons ally. He doesn't play Dungeons & Dragons with them. I don't even think he plays Dungeons & Dragons, but he encourages them in their pursuits. And he and if they come to him and say, hey, we need this room and we want to play, or if they're like, hey, we need this book to look up, alchemy, some ingredient alchemist fire, he's going to be there. He's an ally. He's a Dungeons & Dragons ally, right? Last is the Dungeons & Dragons, but he's not their friend. He's their teacher. It's different. Friend is a really fascinating category of human. It is so unique and so special, right? Because it's somebody that we treat close to family, but it's also somebody we choose. And here's the really sharp edge of it. We reject people as friends. We all do it, right? We all say, this person is my friend, this person isn't. And sometimes we don't say it, but we do it, right? And that can even be harsher, I think. So let's talk about the last category, the external, okay? The Dungeons & Dragons external. This is a person who has a relationship with a dungeon master or a Dungeons & Dragons player, and does not play the game with him. I think the best example of this is Max. Okay, to my knowledge, Max, Lucas's girlfriend, air quotes, and actually question mark in Season 4. We don't know if that's still, almost every relationship is broken in Season 4, which is really interesting choice, right? So you get this situation yeah, it's really fascinating what happens with Max. So Max is with the group. There was talk of her playing, but she never plays, right? Please correct me if I'm wrong on that. I'm almost positive that is correct. Max never plays D&D with the party. If I'm wrong about Max, then I'm definitely right about Steve. Steve would be the external, but I think Max is the correct external. She is very close to them, but she never plays, right? And so this is somebody who is your friend, right? Actually, the external is really odd. It's somebody who, the external is a friend, unlike the other three I talked about, who never plays, right? Who never plays D&D. So I call them a D&D external, right? Very, very fascinating, right? So like somebody who's like, yeah, we're friends, and I know you play D&D, but I am distinctly choosing not to join you in that. It's a very interesting aspect of, I find it fascinating, just, the external. But D&D, but Dungeons & Dragons is explored through Stranger Things 4, and all of these categories are very carefully explored. And when we watch Stranger Things 4, we understand our own Dungeons & Dragons lives better, right? Like, we understand how our relationships are parsed. And when you're a non-casual, when you're a D&D, non-casual, your life is parsed by Dungeons & Dragons. It truly is. You might not realize it, but it definitely is. All that's my opinion. What's your thoughts? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.